Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from Rehan Allahwala's World of Connections. And tonight I am here to speak to Dr. Michelle Peticolas, PhD doctor, not a doctor. And we are going to talk about her life, her work, and her passions in life. And I spoke to her the other day, and she's absolutely fascinating. So we are here to get to know her. I hope I said her last name right. I think I got pretty close, but she'll correct me. And I want to remind you that this show, like all of my shows, is sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which promotes peace one conversation at a time. Having said that, Dr. Michelle, will you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Carla, and it is my pleasure to appear on your stage. I'm Dr. Michelle Peticolas. I'm the founder of Secrets of Life and Death and Second Chance Secrets, which are trainings for people who are coaches, leaders, healers, to help them to create empowered programs online that really make a transformational difference. I also help people to get a second chance out of life, whether they've been disrupted through loss, divorce, or some kind of major life challenge. And you can see there's a connection because a lot of times healers and change makers have had some kind of traumatic experience, and they want, as they solve their problem, to give back and help the world and all the people in it to learn from them and their experience. And what I do is I help them to step into their full power and create a program or programs that really transform their clients.
And Michelle, that is really cool. Now, we were talking before the show, and you told me someone asked you what kind of dog you would be if you came back as a dog. And I'm curious what that answer is.
So I was taking a training with a coach at a retreat, and she threw the question out, what kind of a dog are you? And I didn't have the answer right away, but later on, it finally dawned on me that I am a pit bull. Now, this is not a dog that I particularly associate with or would ever want to own, but I have that tenacity and that perseverance and that stick-to-itiveness that a pit bull has. They do not get sidetracked. They are on the bone like a dog on a bone, and they don't let go. And that's me. I took that attitude or that approach when I was doing my documentary film series. By the way, I also am a filmmaker. That's the way that I approach my work as a coach. I am there for you. I stick to it. I'm going to make sure that you get results. And that's the kind of stick-to-itiveness that I have, that pit bull. But I'm a nice pit bull. I'm not going to bite you. I'm actually very, very gentle and very supportive. I just don't give up. You would have to give up. I don't give up.
I don't give up too. What makes you so determined to do things?
I think it's just part of my personality, my makeup. I have an ability to shift out of a negative mindset we all have negative mindsets sometimes. We get these ideas that we're not good enough, or that we're not educated enough, or we're wrong, and I can shift that. And I have an ability to shift really quickly. No matter what happens, I can see the silver lining, and I can look things in a different way. And that's what helps me to keep going, even when sometimes It can be pretty challenging out there, can't it?
Yeah, it can be. Now, you are a filmmaker. Do you want to talk a little about what you have filmed and why it became a passion for you?
Yes. Well, it was my first passion. Up until I was almost 50 years old, and now I know I don't look older than 30, but up until I was almost 50 years old, I lived the life of a people pleaser. I had no idea about passion. I had no idea that I had any purpose in life. I was just going along trying to make my life as uncomplicated and undisturbing as possible. Of course, it didn't work out that way. I had terrible things that happened to me because I think on one level, the universe was trying to wake me up. So I kept on going and making myself smaller and trying to please people and have them love me and like me and never reject me. Of course, it never worked out that way. So finally, I did a number of things. I certainly did a lot of healing work on myself. And I went to a spiritual retreat for many, many years. And then my parents both died in the same year. And when my mother was dying, I had a huge epiphany. My mother was the poster child for living your passion. She was a toy designer. She took her designs to major toy companies in New York City with my aunt, who was her partner. So she really went out on the edge because back in the 60s, housewives didn't do that sort of stuff. But there she and my aunt were doing it. They were living and having a ball. So she lived her passion, sometimes to the neglect of her 6 children. Okay. So I had issues with her, but here I am with her. She's in her last weeks of life. And I'm sitting in her studio going through papers of hers, being the dutiful daughter and trying to clean out some stuff. And I pick up a photocopy of one of her designs and I hand it to her and I say, "Do you need this anymore?" And she looks at it. She goes, "Oh, I guess I'll never finish that project." Well, of course, her words pierced my heart. I was so triggered by that. I took the paper back and I said, "We don't need to deal with this right now." And that moment where I could have held space for her, I could have asked her, "Well, what does it feel like not to have a future? What is that like? I mean, that's intense." I ran away. And that moment of intimacy that I had craved with my mother all my life was lost forever. And her little brief moment of regret became this huge regret for me because I blew it. But in that moment, I woke up because I realized if she, who was the poster child for living your passion, could have a regret, where did that leave me? I realized that if I didn't start getting on the bandwagon, if I didn't start living my life, I was going to end up with a huge regret at the end of my life. And that was what gave me the impetus and the stick-to-itiveness, that pitbull attitude to finish my documentary. First, it was one documentary and morphed into 3 documentaries, and I finished all 3 of them. They are like half-hour documentaries. I sold them to the academic community. They're still available on Canopy as a streaming video. And I had somebody from hospice reach back to me and say, "Your documentary about death is what I give my clients to understand what it's like to die, because there's no other documentary out there that really gets you into the feel of what it's like." And that was what made my documentaries unique, is that I really captured the experience of facing death, of caring for somebody who's dying, and for grieving.
Now, was this but the documentary or documentaries based on your parents' death, or was it more?
No, it was individuals. I went out to find out what it was about. Now, this was back in 1998. There was nothing out there. It was the year after I started making my documentary that, what's his name? Bill Moyers came out with his series called On Your Own Terms. But before that, there was nothing. The only thing that was out there was Kubler-Ross and her book. That was it. There was nothing there. And I was like shocked. I said, because I went through this whole thing with my parents and I was just blown away. I was emotionally very tamped down, and this just blew me out of the water. And I said, why did I not know about this? This is huge. Why don't I know about this? And I went out to seek answers, and I went to interview people that would give me answers. And most people didn't even want to talk about it. The people who talked about it were people who were gay, or people who were Buddhist, or who else talked to me? People who were in the medical profession or in the hospice profession. But most people, otherwise, they didn't want to talk about it. It was like, it was taboo. Death was taboo. Not anymore. It's huge. This is 20 years later. It's totally changed. And I've been part of that change because I made my films and I did workshops and I took my film series to the cancer community. I got 3 grants to share them with the cancer community, because here are people who are facing death. You know, it's like they've been given the death card. So that was what happened. That's what set me on my path. And then that, of course, eventually evolved into my working in hospice as a grief and loss facilitator, group facilitator, and then grief coaching. And now I help people to get their second chance. I'm right now, I don't know, it's maybe I'm getting older, but I want to look at what you do with the last part of your life, not necessarily jumping into dying right now. That's where I am.
What did you learn about? What made you so fascinated with death?
Well, what made me fascinated was that it puts you in an altered state. It puts you in a different reality when you were going through it. And you realize finally that everything else that's going on in the world is irrelevant. It's just a dream. The only thing that's real is that we die. That's what's real, is that we all die. And that this is a momentous transformation. And I already was practiced spirituality, so I was already a spiritual person. So for me, it was experiencing it on a visceral level, understanding what that is, to know that we die and that we only have this short amount of time, which is our lifetime, which, by the way, goes away in a flash, a short time to get the most out of this life. And that's what fascinated me. And it fascinated me, what is it like to know that you're going to die? That you actually have gotten the death card that says, you know, you're dying. And how do you face that? And then the question of caregiving, because I was a terrible caregiver. I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody had trained me. As I told you, I ran away from my mother. And I needed answers. I needed to understand that. And when I learned, I wanted to pass that on to other people, because other people didn't know either. I remember one time I was living in a group home, in a house, shared housing, and one of our roommates, he got a call that his sister was in the hospital, that something really catastrophic had happened to her. And he was waiting to see what happened. And I said, Jean, go. You don't want to waste any time. You just get on a plane and go. And he did. And he was there when his sister died. And he wouldn't have been if he had waited.
I think I'm missing something, because I don't quite understand why
I'm interested.
Fascination.
Okay, so it puts you in the moment. It puts you into real connection with people. There are no facades. There's no role playing. It's real and it's intense. And it can bring out amazing things about people, because people are finally connected with who they really are. Now, some people are terrified because it's hard for them to step out of their role. But when you are dying, it sweeps away all the roles. It sweeps away all the concerns of everyday life. You step out of that flow of everyday life into the moment. And when you are in the moment, that connects you to spirit. That connects you to who you really are and why you're here. And for me, that's the most important thing. That's why I'm here, is to help wake people up. And so that was exciting to me. So the other answer to that, Carla, is my rising sign is Scorpio. That's sex and death. So it's just a no-brainer that I'm attracted to that topic.
I'm really working at getting a deeper understanding of this.
Okay.
Because I've never thought of death in the manner that you do.
Yes.
Did that? I know that you're a Sufi, or you have Sufi practice.
Yes, Sufi practice. Mm-hmm.
Was that when you began getting interested in death?
No. I had been doing the Sufi practice for 13, 14 years. No, what happened was death happened. My parents died. And when your parents die, suddenly that barrier between you and death is gone. And now you're looking and there's nobody between you and death. Whereas, just the natural thing, course of life, you expect your parents sort of like protect you from dying. Right. And then they're gone. And you're like, oh, you mean I die? I mean, I really die? What does that mean to die? What is that like? And I've started reading these amazing books. It took me down. It took me to places you can't imagine. I actually did a series on, was it on death? I guess it was, on Secrets of Life and Death. I did a radio series before they had podcasts. It was not even a radio. It was just, people called up on a conference line. And I had this woman who had gone through 3 near-death experiences. And she told me some of the most amazing stories about what happens when you go through near-death. Fascinating stuff. And then I talked to another person, and this man was, he speaks to people on the other side. And he did 2 whole books on interviewing people who are already dead and what life is like after you die. And it was pretty amazing. One thing that I remember his interviews revealing is that they said, you know what? You guys treat life too seriously. Have more fun.
And that's been a thought in my mind, especially recently. People are like going around and they're not smiling and they're not laughing. And it's really important to smile and laugh.
It is very important. But it just, when you're facing death, when you're facing the death of somebody, you really, you just get into an altered state of reality. It's almost like you are kind of pulled with them. There's this, I believe there's this sort of veil between this 3-dimensional plane and the next. And that when somebody is pulled, you're almost pulled with them. And you get some glimpses of what that's like. And then you come back. Some people actually experience the person's death. They actually go with them for part of the way and then they come back. And it's amazing. When you start to read about what is life after death, what's that like? It's very, very compelling. You read all the books on people who have had near-death experiences, and it's very provocative. But what happens is, why people are afraid of death is because, one, they don't believe they continue after death. So non-existence is really pretty scary, isn't it? The idea that you won't be there anymore. And other people are afraid because they're afraid they're going to meet up with the people they don't want to meet up with anymore. Oh my God, I'm going to meet up with my abusive husband? No, thank you.
Unless they took care of the karma.
Unless they took, well, and I happen to believe that you are totally protected in the next life. That whatever you need is going to be provided for you. So and that's what I believe. I don't know any of this is true. All I know is that there's no other option for me about believing what happens after we die. There's no other way for me to think about it. I cannot take that attitude that we cease to exist after we die. And you know what? If it happens, it won't matter. It won't matter to me because I won't know, will I?
Now, knowing this, how did you see death before you began this journey and now?
I never thought about it. I was too busy putting all of my attention on pleasing other people so that I would feel that I belonged and that I was wanted. Because as a child, I made the decision that I was unwanted and that I was unlovable and I was unworthy and I was not good enough, which, by the way, is really common. It's not like I'm unusual or anything. A lot of people have that issue, but that's what I believed. And so I just put all my focus, and I was really good at it for the first 20 years of my life. Got great grades in school, finished my PhD, and then I got my first teaching job, and I did everything. I tried to please the students. I tried to please the administration. I took on coaching cross country. I taught night schools. I taught adult ed classes. I had people come in and evaluate my teaching. And at the end of a year and a half, less than a year and a half, they gave me a terminal contract. And they said, we don't need you anymore. And I was devastated because I had done everything. It was like, what do I do now? How can I get? So instead of realizing, well, it wasn't a very good fit to begin with, let's face it, it was not a good fit. No, I convinced myself that the solution was for me to only take jobs in which they needed me more than I needed them. In other words, I undersold myself. I took jobs that were beneath my education and my intelligence. I mean, it's not like I worked on assembly lines. I actually worked in group homes for emotionally disturbed kids, which, by the way, did take a lot of my intelligence.
Right. But having done that, and then working with people who are dying,
mm-hmm.
I remember one experience, and maybe you can confirm it, when both my parents were in Florida and I was in Maryland when they both died.
Mm-hmm.
And right before I got the call from my sister telling me, I felt like both parents, they came, they said goodbye, and then they left. And I thought I was crazy. Is this a normal thing?
It happens. It happens. It does. If you are sensitive, you can open to that experience. Because of so many years of my shutting down, I'm not as wide open. And sometimes it's a problem when you're that wide open, because you can also pick up the energy of living people, and they can blast your system. They can be overwhelming if you take on everybody's energy. But that you were able to connect with your parents, maybe you were really close to them and they were able to say goodbye. But I've heard it before. By the way, I've heard it all.
Wow.
I had a man who was in my hospice group, and he told me that after his wife died, she called him on his cell phone. And he picked up the cell phone, and she was on there, and she said, "I'm just checking to see if you're okay."
The phone actually rang, and How did he feel? I mean, that must have been a little...
It was a little disturbing. Yes, it was very confusing. And I've heard plenty of those stories, by the way, because I worked at hospice with people who had partner loss, and they told lots of stories about things like that. Amazing stories. I mean, it's so magical. How could you not be interested in death? The magic that happens is so amazing. So like your parents showing up, that's part of the magic. It's like you have that connection. They show up. They're in their astral bodies. They have ascended out of their physical body, and they came and connected with you. And because you were, maybe were able to connect on that liminal space, maybe they were able to reach you. The problem is that once a spiritual being leaves the body, they are vibrating at a higher frequency. And oftentimes we who are in our physical bodies are vibrating a lower frequency. We can't communicate. But when you can, it's amazing. And you were able to do that. By the way, we can listen to them all the time if we can just open our minds. We can hear. One time I was reading this book by this woman. It was called, I can't remember it right now, but anyway, I had seen her at one of these, there's a organization for near-death studies, and I went and I saw her speak, and she's an anthropologist, but she was also super sensitive, and she tells you how you can hear the people on the other side if they're speaking. And it's just a matter of opening up to their communication and realizing that what they're communicating to you is from somebody else, not from you.
Wow.
So you didn't have you thought maybe you were crazy, but you knew that those weren't you, they were your parents, right?
I've had other experiences where I felt someone visiting me, and there's no way that they physically were in the room.
Right.
But they were here.
Right.
And I know it.
That's it. You got it. That's it. So you can see when you think about those mysteries, why because death is the biggest mystery of life, isn't it? I mean, birth is pretty amazing, but death is the big mystery of, like, where do we go? What happens when we die?
And yet consciousness, and I know that we're getting way above typical talk, but consciousness is how we create our world.
Yes.
And our thoughts go like a river.
Yes.
And they may be positive or they may be negative, but it's what we choose to think about that makes our life real. Am I right or wrong?
Well, my Sufi teacher talks about two kinds of mind. He talks about the intelligence of the heart and the intellect. And a lot of what you associate with what we think about is the intellect. It's often the programming that we were given as children. A lot of it is subconscious. We aren't even aware that it's operating, except when it kind of we get into difficulty, or we work with a coach or a therapist. But the intelligence of the heart is when you are connected to your higher self, to that, and when you connect with that part of yourself, you're literally vibrating at a different state of being. And in that state of being, there is no past, there is no future, there is only the moment. And there's only love, and there's only expansion.
Now, if that is true, what you just said, and I'm not really debating it, can we really say that these bodies, everyone says your body is just a vessel, but that appears to be true now, or more true than I thought in the past.
Yeah, especially as it gets older and you say, wait a minute, I don't want to relate to this. It's like, wow, it is. But you know what? It's also your partner in this three-dimensional plane. I don't want to diminish it. It's very powerful. These bodies are hugely powerful. They have at their fingertips a chemistry lab or a chemistry set that will knock you to your knees. And so it can really disconnect you from your higher mind in an instant because it is so powerful. And that's why you have to partner. And we're here because we need to fulfill our destiny. We need to fulfill why we were here. And so there's this force of the higher mind, of the higher self, the spiritual self, wanting to fulfill its destiny, its soul's code. And then there's the body, and the body has its own agenda. The body wants to keep you alive. All 300 billion cells are all working to keep you alive. And oftentimes in childhood, things happen that make the body afraid. Trauma. And not trauma with the big T, but it could be trauma with the big T. It could be little trauma. Like my father was transferred to Japan. And it's traumatic. I still wake up in the morning and I'm always negative in the morning because of that pattern. That pattern is embedded in my cells. And I know what to do about it and I know where it's from. But in the first waking up in the morning, it's always like, oh, what is this? You know, what's wrong? What's wrong? You know, and that came from the fact that I woke up as a 2-year-old and found out that my father had left. And I didn't see him for many, many months.
Fascinating.
So you have to learn to work with your body. As a spirit, you need to learn to work with your body, to understand it, to love it, to care for it, not beat it up. I mean, so many of us are taught, oh, I hate my body. I hate what I look like. I hate that I'm fat. I hate that it's in pain. And yet these bodies are just so amazing, and they're here to serve us. If we know what they need and we give them what they need, then they work with us. But if we beat them up, they really give us a hard time back.
What would you tell our audience to help them understand you're okay? There's nothing wrong with you. Just keep going and going.
Well, that's what I would tell them, is there's nothing wrong with you, that every one of us has a purpose and a reason for being here, and that every one of us, every one of you out there are needed. You're essential. We are all part of this huge world, and to remember that. And if you forget, remember it. And then to understand that some of your fears, some of your worries are all early childhood programming. And so what you need to do is you need to embrace and love the inner child in you that was wounded. And that's almost all you need to do, is just hold her and love her. And then the body will relax. If you just love her and care for her and make her feel like, yes, I want you. You're important to me.
Do you think the world would change if we all began thinking that way?
Oh, of course it would. Of course it would. So much of the dysfunction in this world has to do with those early childhood traumas, and people not resolving them and blaming them on other people, or blaming them on themselves, or wanting to feel superior because they feel so inferior. It's sad. It's sad. And then, you know, the worst thing of all is that people don't live their soul's code. They live what people expect them to live. You know, there was a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Did you ever run across that? By Bronnie Ware. She went and interviewed people. She was a hospice nurse, and she went and interviewed people in Australia. And she found out that the number one regret of the dying was, I wish I had lived a life true to myself instead of the life others expected of me. It was the number one. So we all have, and so this spiritual DNA in us is pressing to emerge. It's pushing to emerge. And so what people do is they find a lot of different ways to distract themselves, to shut down that voice that says, this is not all there is. That shuts down that voice that says, you need to do something way bigger than you're doing, because they're afraid because of their childhood experience. So they quiet it, and they quiet it with drinking and drugs and computer games and texting. Did you know that 1 out of 6 American adults is on some kind of psychiatric drug, primarily tranquilizers and antidepressants?
And you know how sad that is when you think that they're the most powerful antidepressant is your smile and laughter.
That's right.
And they're paying money to be free of this stress.
That's right. That's right. And they haven't had the training to help them to navigate. And so they're afraid. And they are unconscious about all the stuff that comes in and disrupts them. And that's the work I do. That's what I help people and support people with. And by the way, I have a YouTube series called Your Great Human Adventure. And I talk about the 4 superpowers of having a great human adventure. And I give all my secrets away on this series. So please get on it. Go check it out. And you're going to say, well, how am I going to find that? Well, try looking for Your Great Human Adventure YouTube, and you'll find it. But the 4 superpowers are your spirit, who you really are, the body, which I've already talked about. It's your vehicle through this 3-dimensional plane. There's the brain, or the intellect, which I talked about, which has been programmed as a child when you were a child, and you've been given this deep programming that you have no idea that's going on, and you give yourself a lot of hard time. Your body is upset, and your brain will come in with a bunch of reasons. And then the 4th one is others. Because as we live in this 3-dimensional plane, we are social creatures. We are social animals. And so the influence of other human beings has a huge impact on us. That's why our parents have such a huge impact on us. And we continue to interact with human beings. And one of the worst punishments you can do to a human being is to isolate them. Did you know that? It's one of the worst tortures is to isolate them.
I would think it would be very difficult to be isolated.
Yes. And in a way, haven't we all been kind of going through this huge social experiment in this last year, almost 2 years now, a year and a half of COVID, is the social isolation. A lot of people have really, really suffered from that.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for Zoom. Or
if it wasn't, yeah, I was just thinking that if it wasn't for Zoom, what would we be doing? What about those people who just have, are living alone with maybe their cat or dog? What would it do?
Yes, what would it do? Although if you were stuck with a cat or dog, they are very good companions. They are amazing. In some ways, they're easier than other human beings because they're pure love, with a little bit of selfishness on the part of cats. I mean, you have to accept that.
My very affectionate little cat is behind me, and I didn't realize he was until now. I just looked back, and he's sleeping in the dog bed now.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, they're very important. And there are other animals out there, that you can connect with, but it's not the same. I tell you, there was one coach said, you need to get, 5 hugs a day? Well, if you're isolated, how do you get 5 hugs? If you're in COVID, how do you get 5 hugs? I would actually go out and hug a tree. Or if you had an animal, you could hug your animal 5 times.
You have to. I mean, there's no question. And in their own way, they hug you back.
They
I
do.
know when he comes and he just rubs his head against me and I want him to leave me alone, I'm so happy he's doing it too, because it's a mutual need.
Yes. Yes. It's wonderful. They're wonderful beings.
Don't let them know I said that.
Are you kidding? That cat's behind you. He's heard everything.
And even if they're not behind me, they know.
They know. They totally know.
I'll never forget when I went to adopt him. I was brought to an area where he had a friend, and they're a good friend. Actually, she lives here too. And I went to see her in her little cage because she was sick. She had a little bit of a sinus infection, and he just came wandering up. He found me as I was walking in. I noticed him, and then I noticed him later, when I went to see her. He wasn't going to let me go. Anyway, do you have any last final words you want to share with any?
Wow, did I go? But I came back full circle, back to what I do. So that was good. That worked out really well. So what can I say? One of the most important things that I learned in my journey was to allow my feelings. And so many people that I run into have repressed their feelings, because that's what we're taught in this U.S. culture, is not to have feelings. And that doesn't mean that you go out there and you emote all over the place and you impose your emotions on other people, but that you can actually create a space for yourself where you allow those emotions, because we need to allow ourselves to grieve. We need to allow ourselves to get angry and to release the energy, because when you don't release the energy, it gets trapped in your cells and it can actually cause sickness and bad health. So that's my number one tip, is allow your feelings. And if you want to know more about that, you could certainly reach out to me. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been fun talking to you tonight.
Thank you. It was really a lot. I went to a lot of different places, and Carla, it was really fun. Thank you so much.
And I look forward to having you on Mindport tomorrow morning.
Awesome. I look forward to talking about manifesting. I have another story about it.
Oh, great.
Really good one. Yeah.
And with that, we are going to be ending this interview. Thanks to the people who watched it. Thanks to Michelle for talking to me. And thanks to Rehan Allahwala's Institute of Peace for sponsoring this interview. And with that, you want to wave goodbye with me, Michelle?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, here we go.
Bye, everyone. And we are going off air.